Rosenstein. Welcome to Martalks, where we discuss the internet economy and contemporary issues in MarTech and e-commerce. Today we're joined by Rick Watson. Rick Watson in the technology industry for almost 30 years now, since the very get-go of e-commerce, starting out as an engineer, rising up to CEO of his own startup through a couple of exits, and now leading his own consulting firm. So, Rick, tell me, how does a technology leader like yourself become the head of a consulting firm?
Yeah, it's a funny question because you think it would be like the opposite place I would end up. One of the things I recognized early in my career is it wasn't just the technology that I was interested in. It was what technology could do for people, what technology could do for customers, and how technology could improve a business. And as I kind of moved through different roles in my career, I kind of moved from just a technologist, and I would say in most organizations, technology is not really an independent actor. I mean, they're kind of, you have a set of features to build and you go build those features. But really getting on the side of, I found myself moving to caring about why we were doing what we were doing, which really led me kind of on the customer journey and then helping build organizations and businesses that satisfy and improve the lives of customers. And as a byproduct of that, create great businesses that are able to do that, which is the way you make that sustainable and long lasting, and not just sort of a flash in the pan. So that kind of flywheel between great technology, great businesses, and things that solve for customer problems are things that I kind of picked up over years from other great business leaders and books and things. So I think that's really how that journey began.
Well, it sounds like you captured value and you wanted to put yourself as close to it as possible and as consistent in an environment as possible. And consulting is definitely where you have the most opportunity to really apply those principles and not be beholden to any one product or vendor or technology stack or so business methodology, so on and so forth. So it sounds like you found yourself the right home.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I like about it. I mean, especially if you're able to generate enough business, you can pick the projects you work on and who you work on them with. Those are certainly always things that are valuable. And I like that the problems are difficult problems. Sometimes if you work at the same company for a long time, you realize that you have a difficult problem once a year. And then the rest of the year, you're kind of implementing that decision you made in the beginning of the year and just making sure it goes all right. You're shepherding something tough decision you made earlier, but you're not really doing as hard of work as you were. And I think as a consultant, sometimes you're able to see those patterns more quickly because look, here's a reality. I can say this freely. No client wants to hire a consultant if they can avoid it. Why would they? Like they would just solve the problem themselves. Like who wouldn't
Or
want to solve the problem themselves?
or a headhunter. I want to or a headhunter. Yeah.
Exactly. If they could recruit the role themselves or solve the problem themselves, they would. But they maybe want to do it faster, cheaper, better, and bring in some outside expertise that could help accelerate those things. So I always get a laugh out of that.
Well, obviously, so many things have happened in your career to lead you to this. What were some of the most formative times during your business career? And if you could, you mentioned mentors. I'd love to hear some of your favorites.
Yeah, some of my favorites kind of just go back to the beginning. Scott Wingo and Michael Jones, who were some of the principals at Channel Advisor, really just showing the value of entrepreneurship, caring about what customers want, staying focused on a task. Michael was a really good guide for me in terms of what a great product manager was, what that really meant, and how to combine sort of both business and technology
Mm.
with a focus on what customers are doing and making sure that the business is always focused on top priority. So he was really instrumental in me, and he was actually the person I asked when I moved from technology to product management, which is a little bit more business focused. He really helped enable that transition. So from a mentor point of view, that's definitely something that helped. I think that look, you always learn the most from the toughest times, and so I think when sometimes when businesses shrink or you have to do restructuring, you start to really understand what are your priorities, who are the people processes you can count on, and how do you make sure that those get highlighted even in a situation where there are more constraints tomorrow than there are today. If you're making kind of those tough decisions based on finances, and I definitely, having lived through the dot-com bubble in 2001 and like the 2008 recession, those are both formative. I think folks that have only come up in the last 10 years, I think we're just starting to get a picture of that.
Yeah, tough times do bring out the best and obviously sometimes the worst in all of us. But really, that belt tightening and dialing back in on what are your core principles, what is the goal of the organization, and are you delivering what you need to deliver when that comes into stark focus. Folks that aren't on board for the end game, they fall out, and having to pick up the pieces of what they were doing and realign the team, it's challenging, but it brings the most out of folks. And for the folks that are impacted and have to find themselves a new spot, luckily we're still in a very healthy startup economy. So we see a lot of folks coming out of some of the larger players, like obviously Salesforce and now Twilio, and they're going to be going to earlier stage firms where they're going to have an opportunity to be more entrepreneurial. You've had a bunch of projects at this point. What's been your favorite?
I think as a consultant, seeing, I worked to audit a business that was a couple $100 million business, but it was about $50 million on the e-com side. And, the company was preparing for a sale in the next 6 to 12 months. And the question they asked was pretty simple, but I think insightful, which is really like, if we're going to try and sell this business in a year, what are we going to hear when we come to market? So it's almost like, help us do a pre-diligence on our own business so that we can get ahead of the problems that or any pitfalls that might challenge our valuation, or that potential buyers might ask and value the business. So that was a fun project, because you're not just it sort of combines the sort of financial performance aspects with the corporate goals, as well as what are the most impactful execution, items from an execution or strategy point of view that you can improve, in a short amount of time, I guess. And so you have a time constraint, and so you're forced to pick what to work on and what to sort of acknowledge is like, well, we're not gonna focus on all these items. We're just gonna pick the select few, and that prioritization, I think, is a useful exercise.
When you're working with a company that already has its exit kind of mapped out, they have a different set of challenges. That's definitely an issue that I've confronted a few times with founders who are like, look, we're definitely not going to be taking this thing public, and we're going to be looking for a quick exit because we're clearly an acquisition candidate, and we need to hire a CRO. It's like, okay, can we share that with them? Well,
Right.
maybe not, but it's you're treading a fine line there in terms
Right.
of who you're going to hire and who what they're going to do for you. But obviously, having a consultant is a great option, because you're there going, sure, you can do whatever you want. I'm going
Yeah,
to offer you advice where I'm not constrained by anything.
exactly. Yeah. So you can be honest with your client and provide your outside perspective and not be subject to any internal politics or really any other things. And obviously you have the benefit of having seen many different businesses, and they may or may not agree with your perspective, and that's totally fine. But as long as the perspective is grounded in kind of the market reality, then most clients tend to at least appreciate your point of view, even if they don't act on every item that you're recommending.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting point there about point of view. There's a new set of technologies that have come onto the market here over the
Mm.
last few years in composable commerce, or MOC, microservice architecture. And there's a lot of debate. Clearly, the old guards are saying that you don't need it, and the new providers are adding value. So obviously, composable commerce is here to stay, and it's a growing part of the internet economy. So tell me, who do you think composable commerce is a good fit for?
Yeah, I think composable commerce tends to be a good fit, and even the definition I think people struggle with from a point of
I
view.
know it.
And really, the idea is it's a set of principles. Really, is what we're talking about, and it's principles of which you design a large scale system, and those principles are that there's a separation of concerns, like at the highest level, there's a separation of concerns between the different parts of the system. You know, you should have different sets of functions, whether those be, some people are putting that in the mock has made it's like microservices that have APIs. That's certainly one one approach to it. But in the at the end of the day, you're talking about independently upgradable units of functionality that
Mhm.
work together to achieve some greater e-commerce solution, which can also be provided in a different way, which is usually in some kind of all-in-one software, which sometimes is easier to get up and running because there's fewer vendors and connections to deal with.
Yeah, I've heard various scenarios at this point. It certainly seems like it comes down to the agency. And if you've got a competent agency partner, and we've already spoken to, for instance, Pivotry and Joel
Mhm.
Farquhar, their head of engineering, and Joel Hudson, their head of database for Informatica. And if you've got the right agency partner, they're going to make that multi-vendor, multi-contract issue a non-issue for the most part, but obviously there are separate contracts that need to be signed, and there is additional ink that does need to flow from
Right.
pens in order to make that happen. But beyond that, it certainly is a very similar process in terms of go live, and in many cases it can be faster. It just depends on what stack you choose. But what are some of the things that I would have to say the agency or the platform sales reps are not telling you about?
Yeah, I think um, the things that they're not telling you about generally, a lot of it depends on your selection process becomes more difficult because you're choosing from a universe of multiple providers. It's more difficult to design your architecture because there's more players involved and you're putting together the solution from multiple components.
Mhm.
And so that requires, more diligence upfront rather than just choosing the best overall package, which is, I think, what a lot of people have done in the last, 10 years, and maybe they've evaluated like, oh, we're going to go with SAP Hybris, or we're going to go with Salesforce at the high end. At the low end, they might be choosing between like Shopify and a BigCommerce and like comparing them to, to each other. But the composable approach is really a different path there, where you're sometimes you're selecting, you're separating out your PIM and your OMS and your cart provider and your CMS, and maybe even your hosting and edge network provider that is distributing your content, to where your buyers are. And so there are just much more pieces to consider.
Mm,
And those pieces, it's hard to predict the cost up front, and each of them have a different pricing model. And so you have to know what your usage of those components might be to build your overall ROI.
mm.
Whereas the ROI for Shopify is much more easy to know, because you could just say, oh, here's my order volume, this is the tier I'm in, this is what my price is going to be. But
Mm.
if you're dealing with 5 to 10 providers, it's much more complex to make that calculation on the back of a napkin.
Yeah, on the back of a napkin, absolutely. I think that most chief digital officers that they do use a lot of napkins. They spend a lot of time in cocktail lounges because they have the free time to do that. I've seen most often kind of companies launching into the composable realm through using the headless solutions that are being increasingly provided, have now been provided by all the major platform providers, and their first taste of it is really that component that goes to the front end, that digital experience component, and using that API-led development, they have a front end that can be infinitely configurable to look and feel however they want that day, uh,
Right.
and have the actual product team uh, doing that in real time versus having to have the development team mess with it, because virtually all of the mock solutions for the business user, once they're implemented, are no code or low code. So they're taking off, and they may be just adding in another component like a PIM you mentioned, or a personalization or search. And as they peel pieces and parts and functions out of that legacy monolith, they're essentially setting themselves up for being able to select a fully composable stack if they choose to do so.
Yeah.
But yeah, they got to back into it in that case. But it is,
Yeah.
yeah. But when you look at how these you've mentioned obviously ROI is one of the reasons that clients, retailers choose one vendor over another. But what are some of the other reasons that you see a brand choose one vendor over another?
I think number of application options, so number of partners that you're connected to. So does one partner have more developer support available for it? So if something breaks, you have 10 people to call rather than one person to call, where it's a little bit more risky. Does this one company go out of business? I
Get
think
in line.
that's definitely something that IT leaders worry about. If you need to pick up the phone, or you need to fire an agency or a vendor, is there another agency that you could call? And to have a healthy ecosystem of partners
Mm.
that you could work with, I think that's one. I think another one would be flexibility. Am I designing myself into a mode where if my business grows, am I going to limit my growth by choosing the platform I'm on? Can it expand to meet the future needs of the business? That's another huge element outside of ROI, because if you don't have that flexibility for expansion, regardless of the type of architecture you choose, it's not going to be a good fit for the business.
Uh, as long as it grows. As long
Exactly.
as it grows, if your plan is for
Exactly.
growth, you got to have that flexibility built in. You got to future-proof your business as much as possible when you're setting up your stacks. So, when you look at, let's kind of switch gears for a moment here. We're talking about commerce, but let's talk a little bit about B2B marketing. And what do you think a modern B2B marketing organization needs to be doing?
Yeah, I think B2B marketing, and it's almost true, I think, across the board. Really, the foundation of all marketing today is really content. And it goes back to content that your audience cares about, which means you need to know who your audience are, and you need to have content that's memorable. It kind of goes back to that old book I read, whatever, 10 plus years ago, like back to Seth Godin's like purple cow. Like there's a reason that people understand and appreciate, and it sticks in your head when something is memorable. And of all the things that we read, thousands of inputs notifications that we're selected to, you if your content is meh or forgettable, then your customer isn't going to remember you at that moment of truth where they're like, what was that thing that I knew about? And they understand that you're not just trying to sell them something, you're trying to give them a feeling about how, not just that you will achieve some outcome from them, but you're selling them how that outcome will make them feel. And I think as a B2B marketer, I think that sometimes we forget that. And I think all of us, I would say almost every business owner from some respect, if you're selling to companies, you're a B2B marketer, whether you know it or not. So having content that is memorable and that starts to build trust in your buyer base, so that when they have a need, they may not always have a need for your services, but when they have a need for their services, you're the first person that comes to mind.
Forgive me, but first.
Yeah. Yeah, from the podcast, that's been a fun evolution. So having really the foundation of my marketing everywhere is just trust.
Mhm.
And people trust that I'm an independent voice, that I'm not towing any particular company line. There are a number of companies that I follow consistently: Amazon, UPS, Shopify, Salesforce and others, because they're the big players.
Mhm.
And everyone in e-commerce has to do business somehow with those big players. And so I use stories, sometimes I use stories related to those big players to help the audience think about their own businesses.
Mhm.
Or if Amazon is making this move, how might that affect your business, especially if you're a small business and you're working with some of these big, if you're a startup and you just launched a big business on Amazon, then it pays to know to why they did this and what it's going to mean for you in a year or two. So those are the things that are fun for me, and to hear people say that, oh, I just got into e-commerce and someone told me to follow you and I'm glad I did.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed your content. I've been mopping it up as fast as I can, and yeah, I think that you provide a great set of perspectives on the changes that and the business issues that the major vendors are tackling. And as a partner for AWS in particular, or Salesforce, or SAP, understanding how they're running their business is certainly going to impact how you engage them as a partner and what you can expect from them in terms of enablement, in terms of marketing, in terms of helping you with your brand. Some obviously are not great at managing their own brands. Some are better at managing their own brands, but not trusting somebody else to make that vision of what you're going to feel like is key. From what I've garnered from you, and obviously I agree totally with that. I think that we've also got a situation where emerging companies that are led by technologists that are new to marketing and sales really benefit from having as much input as possible into what that looks like when it's successful. I'm going to quote James Driscoll, the CEO of Elastic Path here, who said, we're essentially selling the brand. What is your ideal vision for your brand experience? What did you want to be when you grew up? What do you want to be? And that is a feeling.
Right.
That's a feeling. Well, I live in the world of social media. I spend most of my days on LinkedIn, and I'm curious about your thoughts about what's the secret to success on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think it kind of relates to the
I'm going to take
B2B
some
market.
notes. I'm going to take some.
Yeah, I think the B2B marketing comment I made earlier is relevant here. LinkedIn is, I would say, one of the most, if not the most powerful B2B marketing platforms we have at our disposal today. And I think second place is not even that close,
Mhm,
just in terms of reach and your ability to make not only new customer relationships, new partner relationships, new people that could collaborate with you. It's definitely the kind of place where um, if you understand how to leverage it, it can make a big impact in your business. I mean, my business, probably over 80% of all my new business comes from LinkedIn.
mhm,
And that comes from sustained focus over several years of just every day waking up and posting content that I believe people will benefit from.
mhm,
And I think there are a couple of keys to that is number one, it has to be useful. Useful could be insightful, useful could be helpful, useful could like, did you know, did you realize? Whatever useful is to your type of audience. I think that's one. Second, as I'm a huge believer in consistency. If you want to stay top of mind, you need to be consistent. And I think every marketer wants to be top of mind. And I think LinkedIn helps you do that because it's relatively easy to post new content. I think the biggest mistake people make is people try to sell too much. And it's almost like you're talking your own book, like, oh, I'm only going to talk about like I'm a recruiter and every post is going to end with a link to my website. Like,
mhm,
well, people will very quickly tune that out
mhm,
on LinkedIn now or really any channel. And so I think those that's the start of your, your LinkedIn journey is really focusing on being useful, being trusted, such that as they have a problem that's useful. Kind of like one final point on LinkedIn that's actually surprised me, and I didn't fully appreciate when I started my LinkedIn. Uh, I, I think like a lot of people, I was on LinkedIn for a long time. I saw it as an online resume, and I didn't really do that much with it when I started with it. And it's really only as I became a small business owner that I began to really appreciate what it could mean from a business point of view. So it's just a phenomenal tool. And the one key insight that I learned was it's not just about who you're connected to, it's about who they're connected to.
mhm,
And so it, you don't necessarily need to care about the vanity metrics, like do I have so many connections or followers? That's important. And obviously the more you have, it's not worse for you. And so that's a good a good philosophy. But keep in mind that you can be introduced for new business on LinkedIn to people you have never met by people you have never met.
mhm,
And that has, to me, that has been the thing that has blown me away more than anything else about LinkedIn is the reach that it has. You don't have to have a coffee with someone. They learn about you, similar to a podcast. They just by listening to you, they learn a little bit about you and how you work and your personality. And then they might introduce you to somebody important that you may never have met in your entire life without that connection.
yeah, the power of it is it's immense, and it's been the most useful advent that I've had, certainly to my business, in 27 years. It's been huge.
Oh, wow.
I was one of the first 10,000 users.
Oh,
got the,
wow.
got the t-shirt. It's it's been a great ride, and they've consistently surprised me with their fidelity to their mission, which is to
Uh-huh.
provide the best forum for uh, connecting and sharing ideas. And I think they've done a fabulous job, and I hope they don't change.
Right.
Let's talk about a big player who is changing or is trying to change. You talk a lot about Shopify, and Shopify is trying to go up market with its enterprise offering. What do you think they're trying to do with that?
I think on the simplest level, they're trying to have more influence on e-commerce. They're trying to grow faster, get bigger customers, and make more money. I
Mhm.
mean, that's the short answer. Is I think everyone knows them as the best provider for the little guys, and I think my suspicion is at some point more marketing to the same base becomes a little bit diminishing returns for them
Mhm.
from a growth point of view. At some point, more and more of their business is being driven by their Shopify Plus offering. And I think they've seen that as very impactful. And it's now twice Shopify Plus and merchant services revenue, which is, taken from their payments like Shop Pay, which is standard with Shopify Plus. It's now growing it's like by 2x their traditional you know, small business product, which is, $30 a month, or, there are a few different tiers. And so I see what they see is like they've grown these brands, and then as they graduate, what they don't want to happen is them to graduate off the platform. And
Yes.
so
Yep.
I think that's the simplistic answer for what Shopify is doing here,
Mhm.
is trying to take their strength at growing brands and ensure that they don't lose them at the moment of truth. You know what I'm saying? To another platform, whether it's Elastic Path or Salesforce or Commerce Tools, or whatever platform we're talking about.
Yeah, it's the completeness of vision, being able to grow with the customer, and they've got challenges there in terms of their architecture and being able to re-architect it to allow that sort of expansion is a real challenge when you've got
Mm-hmm.
an integrated offering, and they're
Mm-hmm.
grappling with that, as every vendor is. I'm going to kind of ask you to put on your prognosticator cap
Mm.
for a moment, because you speak with such a plethora of retailers and online vendors that are engaging in umpteen million initiatives. We've got an unusual economic environment here,
Mm.
where we've got very strong hiring right now, and yet the forecast, we keep hearing about a downturn taking place, and that impacts what sort of investments retailers are going to make. And in terms of what they prioritize and what they push off, in your conversations that you're having here over the last month with merchants, what types of solutions do you see them prioritizing, and which are they de-emphasizing?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is most merchants are prioritizing their existing customers, making them happy, and becoming more profitable.
Mhm.
And they're de-emphasizing growth at any cost and the extremely high valuations that have resulted over the past few years of the pandemic that now have, evaporated.
Mhm.
And so everyone's focused on cash flow, making their existing cash last longer because it's harder to raise money today than it was 12 months ago.
Mhm.
Um, and those are the broad themes that I see people focusing on right now. It's not that there's not growth, because there is, and there are companies that are growing, but I think the companies that are growing are doing it carefully.
Mhm.
They're not making these tremendous bets and then hoping they're going to catch up to those physical investments, like your big CapEx investments, like new buildings, lots of new people. They're measuring those over months and quarters. They might make a 3-month bet and then see, did their projections line up with why they made that bet? And then they'll make another bet. And so I think the planning process has become more structured and incremental in the short term, because I think of the experience of the last 2 years. People are a little bit once bitten, twice shy, where there's definitely hiring happening. And depending on where the business started from and where they're going to, they could be hiring a lot. But then there are some businesses that are completely frozen. They're not hiring at all. Or they're hiring with a number of restrictions. And I think that's because a year and a half ago, we all thought the pandemic was over, and we went into 2022 saying like, oh, the consumer is great. We're over the pandemic. People are going to start spending again. And then we got into March and April, and Russia declared war in Ukraine, and there was inflation, and the consumer reprioritized. And so it really threw a lot of businesses for a loop. That consumer reprioritization of spending and the rising interest rates. So people are waiting. It will take some time for businesses to get back their old confidence that, okay, we're in a normal time again, we can invest in a normal way and assume that we're going to, predictions have become harder, I think.
It's I've seen the solutions that are really pushing the needle on profit, on margin, on customer share, getting, continuing to have very robust pipelines, and the solutions that are on the back end around optimization or load balancing or monitoring or application development getting kind of pushed back a bit. Because it's about
That's interesting.
customers. It's about the customers, keeping the customers engaged. Well, you mentioned planning, and I know that you do a great deal of work with companies addressing their supply chain issues, and they've really come to the fore here over the last few years. Visibility, replenishment, distribution, sourcing, take your pick. It's a long list. There's a lot of vendors out there. Can you give us an example of how you helped unravel the problems a particular brand was experiencing and how you addressed those with solutions?
Yeah, I think, there are a couple of examples. I worked with a brand about a year and a half ago that was a multi-$100 million wine brand that had, several sub brands left to it, and they were kind of going into a direct to consumer realm. And part of what we're doing from a planning point of view is helping them. How should we build a supply chain that supports a direct-to-consumer business, given the fact that we have stores and we have existing warehouses for our B2B business that might be selling to grocery stores or restaurants or the liquor board? And that was definitely sort of an assessment exercise. What is the state of the organization today? What is the people, process, and technology that the business is working with today? And assessing the options versus, like, should we be using a 3PL? Should we be developing our own capabilities? Should we you try to be fulfilling from our stores? Or should we set up dark stores, near where the consumer is? And so a lot of it was, okay, if we're going to choose these different options, how much is each going to cost? How hard is it to each to implement? What are the staffing, technology, and building requirements to do so? And so those sorts of options, my business leans heavily in planning and assessment, I would say, relative to other types of consultancies that are focused more explicitly on execution. And so that I think colors a lot of my background, and I'm actually in the position of recommending at times execution agencies that will come in and it's like, okay, now that we have the framework, we understand kind of the big picture options from an independent point of view. Sometimes they want their own staff to do it. They don't hire someone because they now they have a roadmap, that they can execute from. So that was a very fun project that I've worked on recently.
Excellent. It's wonderful when you actually give someone a plan and they execute on it.
Right.
There's a lot of times you're throwing that plan over the fence. It's like, oh, hey, here you go. Thanks so much.
Totally.
How often do you get to check back in and say, how much of this have you actually implemented or executed on?
Yeah.
None of it. Oh, well, that's great. It was a fun 6 months for me, though. Thanks. Appreciate it. It was great getting to know you.
Right.
Well, Rick, it has been great getting to know you. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. This has been wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Daryl. I appreciate being on the show.
And I'm going to put a link to your podcast, the Watson Weekly, and we will be listening in to you as well. Have yourself a great day.
All right. Thanks so much, Daryl.
Thanks for listening to Martalks.
Please leave a review and a rating on your platform of choice. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcast platforms. To find out more about how the Rosenstein Group can help you find the right leaders for your client development teams in MarTech and e-commerce, please visit our website, rosensteingroup.com.